super excited to have both Al and Mark here join us today. Start with Al. Al is a senior partner at Farris. His work in wine law includes the acquisition and sale of wineries, commercial agreements, and policy and regulatory matters. He recently published an article, A Pandemic Survival Guide for BC Wineries, How to Weather the Coronavirus, where he included about 21 observations and survival tips on the subject. And then our other guest today is Mark. Mark's law firm, Vintage Law Group, where he provides a full range of legal services to the wine and liquor industry. Mark is also on the Business Technical Advisory Panel, which was tasked with making recommendations to improve efficiency and relations between the government and BC liquor industry. He's also the founder of an annual wine and liquor conference held in Vancouver each February. And through his website, winelaw.ca, he's been providing timely and important updates for the industry on COVID. Thanks, guys, for being here, and I'll let you two take it away.
Thanks very much, Anthony and Chris, for inviting us. We're excited to be here to chat about the effects of COVID and the implications for the wine industry. Al, want to jump in?
Yeah, I think we're going to organize our talk or our interaction with you on three separate topics. We're going to start out about talking about the impact of COVID and the pandemic on the industry. Then start to talk about responses, including in some depth how to reopen when the provincial plans allow us to reopen. And then third, interesting topic of what we need out of the regulators, right, to help us get to a new normal and with some flexibility.
Okay, so should we just, I guess we'll just jump in, starting to talk a little bit about the impacts. I mean, one of the, obviously we're in completely uncharted waters and unprecedented times here, and this is a situation which I've never obviously seen anything like the gravity and seriousness of this during my time in the industry. And we are likely to see some effects and consequences over the next months and years probably, which the whole industry is going to have to grapple with and react quickly to. And as Al mentioned, hopefully the regulators will act quickly as well to allow the industry to react. The most obvious effect that we've seen so far is a dramatic changes to the sales and distribution channels for wine in the province and throughout the world. Particularly, of course, the shutdown of the hospitality channel, which has the restaurant, bar, and hotel businesses are really bearing the full brunt of the shutdowns and the government health orders. Restaurants, as you know, are only operating takeout. Liquor primary establishments have been ordered to close completely, and even on your manufacturing facilities, your lounge endorsements and tasting capabilities have been ordered to be closed. So that's obviously a dramatic impact on that channel. Al, do you want to jump in with some more?
They say it's cursed to live in interesting times, but it certainly has been interesting to watch the kind of the seismic shift in the sales channels. The collapse of hard to overestimate how difficult the collapse has been for restaurants. I mean, wineries still have inventories. Actually, liquor sales are probably still up 30 or 40% over the pandemic. Tasting room sales, of course, wasn't really the season, but if there's some wineries that are dependent like 70% on tasting room sales. Difficult times, but the sales on the internet are booming, and wineries that have put off for way too long getting internet savvy and social media savvy. I don't know if there's any that aren't making an effort now. Sales at the grocery stores are booming. Sales in the private retail stores are booming. So compared to some industries, we haven't done that poorly, but because of that shift in the sales channels, the industry has to do a lot of adapting to a changing situation.
Yeah, I think the key really is to look there at whatever percentage of distribution you were previously doing in the various channels. And obviously, if your winery was relying significantly on the hospitality channel and on walk-in traffic to your tasting room, those two particular channels are obviously going to be severely affected in the coming months. Well, they have been already severely affected, and they will continue to be severely affected. International borders are closed, and there's not much even internal provincial travel or inter-provincial travel happening right now. So we're looking at the next few months, which could see some significant effects in terms of tourist traffic and tasting room traffic, which are obviously going to be significant.
In particular, the downtown white table type restaurants that depend on travelers and businesses and traffic from the office towers, they are not coming back soon, right? And if they do, and when they do, they'll probably be drawing down large inventories large cellars that they built up over the years. So if you're nimble and looking for restaurant business, I think there will, because of all the failures and the falling commercial real estate prices, I think there'll be a whole breed in the next 2 or 3 years of more entrepreneurial, new concept restaurants that have a big back end operation that's geared up not only at servicing table service in the restaurant, but I think takeout is here to stay. I think all these new restaurants will be having new wine lists, and it's an opportunity to get in there. At the same time, the Earls and Cactus Club and whatnot will probably expand because they're so well capitalized. They'll probably fill the void as things get back to normal, if they ever do. And more of those chains who are hard for the small wineries to sell to will be dominating in the market. But and it's not only the pandemic, right? That's only the start of it. I mean, we're probably going to have another shutdown in the fall. That is devastating for a restaurant because they have permanent staff. They have inventories of spoilable inventories. They have monthly rents to pay, property taxes to pay. It's a very different situation than the wineries are in, and it's kind of a desperate situation. So if you're dependent on the restaurant channel, you've got to diversify into the other channels.
Well, I'm maybe slightly more optimistic or maybe just hopeful that we won't have another shutdown in the fall. But I do think that the restaurant channel is going to be severely affected no matter what happens. Restaurants Canada is predicting that 50% of independent restaurants will probably not survive this. Either they won't survive either immediately, or they'll be within the next few months they'll be forced to close. So obviously that channel is something that you really need to look at if you have a lot of sales in the restaurant channel. I think that's going to be the hardest hit. I mean, another avenue which I think is important to look at, and personally, I'm also the chair of the Vancouver International Wine Festival. Traditional wine tasting and marketing events like the Wine Festival and like the BCWI's tastings and regional tasting events, those sorts of events are not able to be held under the current restrictions, and they're probably going to be the last types of events that are permitted, because those larger type gatherings are really at the bottom of the list, I think, on government's list of things that they're going to reopen. So it could be quite some time before we get back into those sorts of marketing and promotional activities. I mean, obviously, I'm sad about that and concerned about that from the perspective of the wine festival. And it's not clear exactly what the timelines are going to be for restarting the more traditional types of wine marketing. But I think, everybody needs to think about other ways to market beyond those channels.
Those larger gatherings, the same applies to weddings and concerts and other, winery dinners and everything, right? And they are in phase 4 of the government's rollout back to work, which is probably not until there's a vaccine, right? It's probably at least a year away.
Yeah, I mean, Al's absolutely right. Although all those types of larger events are in what listed right now in what the government is referring to as phase 4, which really they're currently saying that won't happen until there's a vaccine or some sort of larger community immunity. I'm not so sure that they'll be able to last that long. If a vaccine doesn't come along within a relatively reasonable time, I'm not sure that government can keep the economy locked down indefinitely. But anyways, that's just my personal thoughts.
But Mark, I've said this to you before, last time we talked, it's 12 years of absolute boom that we had, right? It was 12 years since the last recession. And it's not only the pandemic and the shutdown, it's almost inevitable that we're facing a recession here as well, right? And the only issue is whether it's, the pundits are calling it either a V-shaped recession where we come out real quick, or at the worst, an L-shaped recession where we are in it for 5 or 10 years. So,
can I? Sorry, hey Al, John Clarides here.
Yeah, hi John.
A couple of observations. I think you're right on that, and I know historically after the pandemic in 1918, governments had to pour at that time tens of millions of dollars in the economy, which now today translates into trillions of dollars. Then we moved into the Roaring 20s, and then after that, we all know what happened. As far as for wineries go, Mark and Al, and I posted this on LinkedIn, is wouldn't it be nice if the BC wineries had an audience of 34 million people to sell to instead of 4? And that's critical. And I would love to know what the BC wineries are doing to have that audience. I mean, Mark and I, we've been talking about it for 20 years, and nothing's happened.
Yeah, but maybe we are on the cusp, John. Maybe we are on the cusp, but right?
Because I would like to think so. But here's the thing that I think irritates me the most is that, as you said earlier, we had great economy for 16 years, and the previous government did nothing because they were riding on the coattails of a high economy. Why not, if you're a visionary government, or if you have a visionary leader, whether it's the BCWI or anyone in the BC wine industry, saying, look, we need an audience of 34 million people.
Yeah.
So we can market our product just like a pair of shoes or a T-shirt.
Yeah.
And no one's done that. Now we have a stress test, and the stress test is COVID.
Okay. Totally. Okay, but let me focus you on kind of late-breaking news, right?
Yes.
Remember a year ago, Doug Ford, the restrictions of shipping into Ontario used to be imposed by policy of the Liquor Control Board there.
Right.
But about a year ago, Ford put in legislation that was very draconian, and penalties and whatnot scared a lot of people off of gray market shipping. But what Mark and I are watching, and I'd be interested in Mark's views on it, is that he built a sunset clause into that legislation, and that legislation is expiring on June 30th. So, unless we are blindsided, unless it's all smoke and mirrors, and it's getting to be very short time period before they can impose something else, and we may be able to ship to Ontario on July 1st. And the timing, like you say, could not be more perfect, right? There's a renewed focus on local supply chain. There's a resurgent national pride in how we've done as a nation in all of this, and how, if it's going to happen, if it's just going to happen by stealth here, we should be talking about how we have everybody toasting in July 1st with Canadian sparkling wines, because it may be happening. I don't know.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. Mark?
I mean, I'll jump in and add a few comments to that.
Please be positive.
I'm always hopeful, which probably is foolish some of the time. And John Florides will probably back me up on that. But the Ontario restrictions, when they first introduced them, they were introduced for 6 months and they were expiring on December 31st of last year. They waited until the very last minute on that sunset provision to extend the sunset provision into June 30th or July 1st, whatever it says now. So my information from out east is that there's no signals really coming out of the Ontario government as to what they're going to do yet. I know there's a lot of lobbying going on, a lot of pressure to try and get the Ford administration to do the right thing and to open things up. But I have not heard any intelligence from out east yet that one way or the other that they are going to do that, or that they're going to maybe extend the restrictions again. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm hopeful. I'm always cautiously optimistic, and I know that there are lots of people working on it. And it was one of the topics that Al and I were going to talk about later. I think it's extremely important for the Canadian wine industry as a whole, and particularly, BC producers to be able to get, as John said, to get to the rest of the Canadian marketplace. It would be a giant breakthrough if that did happen.
Well, here's an example, and I think Mark, you know this, and Al, but maybe the younger members of our audience don't remember the time when it was cheaper to ship goods east-west than west-east because of the protectionism for manufacturers in Ontario and Quebec. And when Trudeau got in power and said, we're all one country, east, west, west, east, and he got rid of them. But for decades, it was policy and law. And that's why we have no manufacturing out west or any type of industry. And he got rid of that. So that's the type of catalyst that plants a seed and allows it to grow, allows these ideas to grow, and has helped be the Western economy.
Yeah. I mean, some of those issues, I mean, we can maybe talk about some of the regulatory changes a little bit later, because I think maybe, Al, I think you probably certainly had some ideas that you wanted to talk about responses for wineries in terms of how to deal with some of the immediate impacts.
Yeah. Let me give one last comment on John's point, because Dan, is it Posnensky from the Canadian Vintners Association? I mean, his theory of what's going on here is that Ford's agenda is really to break the beer monopoly and if wine opened up if Free the Wine opened up, it would also be Free the Beer, and that's really what he's at. And if he does decide that he's finally going to put this through as an attack on the beer monopolies, we could become the incidental beneficiaries of it. And when you dream about that, people have drifted back to gray market shipping, even the people that were most conservative about this. And they are, but gray market shipping is totally different than openly marketing into Ontario and advertising in the Globe and Mail and educating consumers that that's the way you get the best wines in Canada, is over the internet, direct from the winery and whatnot. So I don't know. I sure hope it happens. In terms of the responses of the industry generally, there's lots of different things that we could talk about. Obviously, as consumers have shifted channels, I think consumers are changing. There hasn't been as much eating at home since the 1970s, right? I mean, and I think that it's going to be, people are enjoying it. It becomes habit forming, and they're looking for more casual, simpler styles of wine and pricing and whatnot for home consumption. I think I don't want to drift back into the regulatory arguments, but we got to keep I think the shipping of wine with takeout, I think it expires May 31st, and I hope to hell it's not going to be disappearing, right? Okay. The big issue in the Okanagan right now is how to reopen tasting rooms. And people are kind of starting to think about that and even thinking about jumping the gun, but they have to understand that there is now an actual health order that prohibits you from running a tasting room between now and May 31st. And if you look at the details of Horgan's speech, even after that, you can't open your tasting room until assuming that order is lifted, you can't open your tasting room until there's an industry-wide protocol developed so that you can protect both your employees and make your customers comfortable. And so just for people's information, what the wine industry is doing is kind of following along with the Restaurants Association and kind of piggybacking on their plan. But what we need is also an industry-specific plan that deals with the unique problems of a winery, and particularly a tasting room. And then that has to go to WorkSafe BC and get approved as the industry plan before you can open a tasting room. So that's an important process right now. And I just got off a call with the BCWI, and they're shooting to have what they're calling the playbook out sometime next week. And then it would go through that process with the WorkSafe BC, right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think, maybe I'll just jump in quickly. I mean, right now, Al's right. There's a provincial health order that prevents manufacturers from operating their tasting rooms or their lounge endorsements. I would expect that the provincial health orders will be modified probably by Monday. And then at that point, we'll have to see what the process is. I am not sure whether or not there'll be a requirement for WorkSafe BC to actually review protocols before you can reopen, or whether they'll just be a kind of guidance that you should to work with your industry association. I don't know what's going to be in the health order, but the health orders will be modified, I expect, next week. And then once we see what the contents of those health orders are, then the process will be a little clearer. So, restaurants I know are planning, some of them are planning to reopen next week. Some of them are planning to wait until June 1st until the process becomes a bit clearer, but I don't think we quite know what the mandated process will be yet.
Yeah, and Sandra Oldfield just commented online on a text here that she is similarly not sure that actual approval of WorkSafe BC is required. It might be something less formal of a process here.
Yeah, I mean, so far, British Columbia, and I think to the government's credit, has not issued very many mandatory orders. The only mandatory provincial health orders really that affect the wine industry are the ones that did shut down the tasting rooms and the lounge endorsements, and allowed the on-site stores and all other liquor stores to be open, and the order preventing the gatherings of 50 or more than 50 people. So, basically most businesses have closed voluntarily, not because they were not because it was a mandatory order to shut.
Yeah.
I think, Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It is this is an important time for every summertime for every BC winery. And if, you know, and credit to the Oregon's government, I think they've done a really, really good job. Safety, of course, of the public is number one. So whether or not tasting rooms open June 1st or not, who knows? But it's incumbent and imperative for every BC winery to work their database. Get on the phone, get on the email, start communicating with their customers. Don't sit at your desk and hand-wring like an old Italian grandma. Start being proactive, and you will be surprised at the support you will get to support local and to support a small business. And you will probably sell more wine in a month of getting on the phone and talking to people and thanking them for their business. Is there anything, you know, you need for the upcoming summer barbecue season at your home, any rosés, anything that you have, you'll be surprised what you're going to find. Because if you're going to wait for those tasting rooms to open, you're going to miss a whole opportunity of telephone and email marketing.
You know, John, I really agree with you on that. I think, you know, I think sometimes a personal touch, especially to your mailing list and your wine club customers, can bring stunningly good results.
Oh my God. I mean,
yeah, if you get your winemaker to call your customer or your, you know, one of the owners, I mean, that's impressive from the customer's perspective that somebody took the time to do that.
100%, 100%. Please, and whoever has wineries out there, I don't see the whole list, or consults or works for them, tell your friends, tell the other winemakers, tell the other businesses, because it's going to be the only way to get through this. Governments work slowly, and this is a serious situation that we're in, and they don't want to have fingers pointed at them and saying you're the catalyst for another COVID or, you know, a spike in cases. So it's imperative that we think outside the box, or actually it's old school, thinking in the box, and get on the phone and email and call your clients. And not just a constant contact, but just on that database. Delve it out. If you have 10 people or 5 people working for you, you can call 15 to 20 people a day, you'd be surprised what you can achieve.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I mean, some of the most impressive, you know, experiences I've had at wineries. I went to visit couple of wineries in the last year or so, where one time I got a handwritten note back afterwards thanking me for the visit, which is unusual because, you know, you hardly ever get real mail anymore, let alone handwritten mail. Something like that's impressive. Another time I got, you know, a corkscrew was just sent to me in the mail. Really impressive, right? Just as a follow-up. Things like that make a big difference.
And a quick note as well, because we always send a follow-up email to everyone. Wine Business Monthly just held, or actually I think it's maybe they moved it to tomorrow morning, but they were holding a whole webinar on phone sales strategies. So they're having a bunch of people on that specialize in that. So if you go to Wine Business Monthly, you can sign up tomorrow, but they're going to send out a webinar link, and we'll send the recording out to everyone with our follow-up email as well.
Sorry, Christopher, I just want to say okay, maybe Al and I are the old goats in this thing, but that's how we learned how to sell, is on the phone. And all of a sudden we pick these things up, and this is how we communicate with people now. Yes, it works, but you know what? Get on the phone and try out your phone manners. If the first sale doesn't work very well, work on the next one. Refine your elevator pitch. And you'll, again, I can't reiterate this enough. You'd be surprised what the results you'll have.
Right now, if you phone someone in normal times at work, you may get the piss off. But right now, when everybody is cooped up, quarantined, to hear a live voice asking how you're doing, and if you've got your wine, you know, magic, right?
Yeah. Al, I'm still waiting for you to pick up your case of Petrus.
I'd like to ask a question at Sandra for Al and for Mark. Can we kind of laser focus a little bit on what, other than sending wine across country, which we know has been an ongoing issue, can we kind of laser focus on what things the Wine Institute should be asking the government for right now because I'm seeing a lot of effectiveness right now with Ian Tostenson and some of the things that the restaurants are getting. And I'd like to find out what, if you had a wish list of 4 or 5 things that the wineries should be getting right now as a result of COVID, what would it be?
Sandra, we're going to give you, near the end of this, we're going to give our list of regulatory changes that we need. But just to set the background for that, and maybe moved on from what John's talking about to the day that tasting rooms open, and it's not going to be June 1st because it requires the infrastructure there. It requires the hotels, and they're phase 3, not phase 2. It requires restaurants, because if somebody's coming up to the Okanagan for a wine tour, they want hotels and restaurants, and people just aren't comfortable with that yet. So I agree with John. You got to sell to people in their homes. But when wineries do open, to focus on what regulatory changes we need, you got to understand what we got right now. And the basic license allows you to sell within the confines of a certain number of square feet in your tasting room, right? And a lot of wineries don't have enough square feet each to safely and comfortably have more than 1 or 2 groups in there at the same time. If you've got a long tasting bar, maybe you can put plexiglass down the middle of it and have a tasting group at each end. But that's the limit for a lot of wineries. But you got to realize that the basic license also allows one specific, even if you don't have a patio that's licensed for tasting, the basic license does allow tastings as part of a tour, right? But understand what the regulators mean by that. It means their image of that is you can guide a customer through your manufacturing facilities, your production facilities, and your vineyard, right? You can go down and see the tank room. You can go out and see the crush pad, and you can walk down some rows of vines. Question whether you can put tables out in between the rows and have sit down as part of the tasting tour, right? But what it doesn't allow you to do is just set up kind of tasting stations in your picnic area. If you got a picnic endorsement, it doesn't allow you to set up a tent in your parking lot, because that's not a tour of your manufacturing facilities, right? And so I think what we need, and people are going to be so much more comfortable this summer tasting outside, and everything you read is you're much safer from COVID outside, and so, and that's a new, apart from the heat of 40 degrees some days, that's a new and interesting concept for tasting experiences. And we probably need some, at least, so I say, lax enforcement to accommodate that in a way that will work, and again, it just shows the silliness and inconsistency of a lot of our regulations. If a guy can open a tasting tent at a farmer's market, right, with a canopy and a bunch of inventory and a cash register out there, why can't he do that on his winery property without worrying about regulatory issues, right?
Here's the analogy for that. So the foundations have to be laid for success after COVID is over. So one of the things that came out of the last liquor review and that we pushed for, Mark and I and a few other people, is to allow to have off-site wine stores at festivals and at events. So we can do that. I did that. I've done that a couple times, and literally we had approval within a day. So why not apply within a couple of days? Excuse me. So why not apply that same logic to your vineyard or your parking lot for COVID? Here's my mobile, or here's my temporary tasting room out in the parking lot. It will work. The other thing for the success for the wineries, and this has worked in Washington State beautifully, is secondary tasting rooms. I remember going to Walla Walla 20 years ago, sitting at 2nd and Main Street. The Whitman Hotel was boarded up. I'm at a stoplight. There was no one on the streets, and the sagebrush just blew through the intersection. There was no one around. Flash forward 25 or 20 odd years, and Walla Walla is a vibrant place. Secondary tasting rooms that were allowed. Woodinville also the same thing. And Woodinville has turned around into a tourist destination place. So Sandra, I think what Al said is right, and the two other things. So three of those things. I don't know if the BC Wine Institute is proposing those. Oh, you're laughing. No, I guess they're not proposing those, but that will set the stage for when after COVID is over, and during COVID for success of BC wineries.
Yeah, to pinpoint specifically what we need for outdoor tastings, you saw yesterday, after all these years of struggling for wholesale pricing for restaurants, the minister not only give that, but also give flexibility to allow enlarged, enhanced outdoor patios for restaurants. Just something that 2 weeks ago the regulators were telling us, don't even think about it, guys. And then the minister just announces it. I mean, what should be announced for the wine industry is that you can use your picnic area. Your picnic areas are expanded geographically, and they can be used for tastings, so that you can set up 6 picnic tables and have 6 very remote groups doing it very responsibly in a way that everybody's comfortable with, maybe with some food. I mean, that should be a no-brainer.
I'll just interrupt for a second there and just say, as probably a lot of people know, the current government did retain me as a liquor policy advisor to run a group called the Business Technical Advisory Panel, and we did put together a report which was submitted a while back with a number of recommendations in that report. What I can tell you is that the Business Technical Advisory Panel group is still working together. BC Wine Institute is part of that group, and there is work being done right now on additional recommendations for government. And if wineries want to put forward specific items, I think now is exactly the right time to do that. There have been some recommendations put forward, and you are seeing some fairly speedy government response on some of those recommendations. But it's definitely the right time to be putting forward ideas for change.
So secondary tasting rooms, does that mean that they would get rid of their moratorium? Because, again, that's what we need. We've needed it for a long time. And now, again, the restaurants are getting something they've needed for decades. And, we should be asking for big things like this, like secondary tasting rooms. That should be top of the list.
So,
you're right, Sandra. To be fair, restaurants have been asking for that for decades. So hopefully that's not the same speed of progress that you'll get on your ask. But the secondary tasting room issue, I personally am very much in favor of that. I mean, that was a recommendation that was put forward as part of the previous government's liquor policy review under John Yap, and it was one of the few of those recommendations that did not get implemented. It was not part of the report that I wrote and the Business Technical Advisory Panel put together, because that wasn't something that was actually put forward by the wine industry at the time. But if the wine industry's changed its mind and wants to do that, or if it just wasn't put forward the way maybe it should have been, we should do that.
The interesting thing, and I've learned this over the years, if you ask for 6 or 7 or 8 things, you won't get anything. If you ask for 3, you get 1. The problem is that these are all tools that we need on a day-to-day basis. And as market changes, you need to be able to react to them and adapt and implement them. And in this province, we have to wait decades or years for any common sense changes to happen that will help business mitigate any potential losses, or a change in societal tastes or demographics. And the government's always the last one to realize that. And there needs to be a consistent working pattern that perhaps meets quarterly, like a board, saying how things working, what needs to be tweaked. It just can't be done once every 10 years and go back, because we're always playing catch up. Whether you're retail or restaurants or a winery, we're one big cosmos or one big system working all together. And this is what the government doesn't realize. They just divide and conquer on us.
Well, I agree with you, John. And I mean, I've certainly heard during the time when I was chairing the panel, I certainly heard lots of frustration from you and from many other stakeholder groups about the speed at which things were being done. On the bright side, there does seem to be, I think there is some progress being made right now. And as you saw in the last sort of 24 hours, you are seeing some media reports now that things are progressing. But as I said, I would definitely encourage the wine industry to get together and to agree on changes.
Yeah, so just one last thing before I go. Any business of any size has staff meetings, quarterly meetings, huddles, dashboards to see how things are working, make sure to rectify any little problems. And this is one I can't speak for other government organizations. The liquor is the one I know best, but it's just the one that they extract the most amount of tax of and make it one of the hardest to do business in. And all these ideas that are posed between, whether it's you or Al or anybody else, work around the world, and we think they can't work in BC because we need to have a nanny state taking care of us, and it's incredibly disappointing.
Well, I definitely agree with you on that, John. I think my personal view is the easiest way to make changes is to look to other places and to see whether it's worked in somewhere else. And if it's worked somewhere else, then it's almost certainly going to work here.
Well, all the ideas I've got over the last 35 years have been a result of traveling or reading. And what works in Vienna or Paris or Chicago or London or New York, I go, well, why don't we have this here? And a classic example, and I don't want to dive this, is the microbreweries. If those of you who remember how long it was to open a little brewery up because the big guys controlled it all, that's all changed.
Yeah. So I mean, let me add a couple of glosses. One short point on secondary tasting rooms. I don't think we should ever talk about secondary tasting rooms without also talking about cooperative tasting rooms as well. And yes. Down in Washington and Oregon, they have both, right? But to only allow secondary tasting rooms is, again, falling into the trap of doing something to help the big guys only because they've only got the capital and the volume of production and whatnot to service. They're the only ones that can have the capital to develop secondary and tasting rooms, right? So I think it's important that we also have the concept of cooperative tasting rooms where 2 or 3 small wineries can joint venture in setting up a tasting room. But now's the time to do it just because people are traveling less and it gets us much closer to the consumer in an easy way. The longer point that I would make on it is just from the perspective of a resident of the South Okanagan, that the restriction, the law that we have that restricts a land-based winery from having a tasting room anywhere but on the farm has seriously distorted the development of the industry. In some ways, it's good. Because the larger, more successful wineries in the South Okanagan have become multi-function facilities that have catered to the consumer's desire for a restaurant accompanying a winery, concert facilities, wedding venues, merchandising, taken to the extreme. You look at the 200,000 square feet or whatever Phantom Creek is building there. But there's beginning to be a real reaction to that too, and the restrictions, the Agricultural Land Commission is starting to think about and toying with imposing severe restrictions on the growth of these multi-function wineries. And at the same time, small towns like Oliver and OK Falls are kind of dilapidated economically, and allowing secondary tasting rooms in rural communities is a way of rejuvenating those small communities by having the associated restaurants and tourist merchandising and other things that come with a tasting room in proximity, right? And also allows the wineries to go to their customers in the larger centers.
Well, I'll concur with you, and over the years I've seen I think 4 towns completely be rejuvenated because of the wine industry: Walla Walla, McMinnville, St. Helena, and there's Bealton, Los Olivos in California. The first 3 were dead. Nothing was there. They lived off of something that happened in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and the 70s and 80s and 90s were not kind to them. And
yes.
So the secondary tasting rooms, the BC wineries need to make sure the powers that be don't put those restrictions on, because look at St. Helena as another example.
Sorry, John.
Right.
I just got to jump in one sec.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just want to be careful of time. We're getting it to 4:20 right now.
Yeah.
So especially for Mark and Al, I want to make sure give you guys time a little to finish up a little bit. I'm fine with pushing this a little bit longer than the hour, but I want to be respectful, Al and Mark, of your time. If you have to go at 4:30, and let everyone know who's on the call that we're about 10 minutes away. So Mark and Al, if you guys have, if there's anything left you guys would like to cover, and then hopefully we might be able to get a question or 2 in at the end as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm okay with going a little bit late too.
So am I.
I mean, I think there are a bunch of, as I sort of already talked about the regulatory process, and I am actually hopeful that there will be some positive changes coming. And there certainly is a process in place through the Business Technical Advisory Panel to relay those to government. And as I mentioned, BCWI is on that panel. So if you can get together through BCWI and ask for things that you want, I think that's probably the most effective way to do it right now. Al already mentioned, I think in terms of regulatory changes, the most obvious one right now is the ability to hold tastings outside and to expand the permitted areas so that you can go outside. I mean, it's safer for everybody and it makes sense for everybody, and customers certainly are going to feel a lot more comfortable with that. Another issue that has previously been raised was permitting wineries to make DTC shipments from their off-site storage locations rather than from their on-site stores. That's commonly done in other places in the world. All of the West Coast wine jurisdictions permit that. And at the moment, as you all know, wineries can only do that for licensee customers, for wholesale customers. They can't do it for their retail customers. At least they're not supposed to do it for their retail customers. So that's obviously a change. I think that is important. We've already talked about secondary tasting rooms, cooperative tasting rooms. Al, do you have any other regulatory desires that you want to throw in there?
Yeah, one that's a bit controversial, and I don't even know how I feel about it, is changing the VQA rules to allow cans and bag-in-box, just because clearly, I saw this amazing statistic the other day that out of the 100 top brands sold in the Liquor Control Board store, about 50% by volume is bag-in-box, right? I mean, there's a huge consumer demand that the BC wine industry is not really and I know it's got a bad image, but quality wines, as people ship more, it's so much more cost effective to ship. And if wineries, I don't think we're going back to having consumers pay the shipping charges. If wineries are paying the shipping charges and you're sending deliveries to home consumers, I know there's no romance to it, but bag in a box makes a lot of sense. Particularly if you got extra wine that you're trying to sell. One.
Yeah, I don't know whether anybody from the industry wants to comment upon that. I mean, it certainly seems to me that, and just personally, it seems like the ability to sell, wine in, really, it doesn't have to be in a glass bottle. I mean, that's the traditional way of doing things. But, in theory, it doesn't seem to me any reason why we necessarily have to mandate that. But anyway, that's...
maybe it's just right now, while I'm drinking at home here and drinking more than I usually do.
I think it speaks to...
It's more convenient.
I mean, for the younger demographic, they're concerned with the environment. There's much less packaging involved. I think there's a lot of merit to that. For us this year, spending less money to invest in packaging materials, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, another one would be wineries having the ability to sell bulk out of their tanks to the consumer. I mean, this is something that happens in Italy all the time. You bring your own container, they fill it. I mean, it sounds silly, of course, but I mean, in these days of packaging costs, I mean, this is something that would really help out some wineries, being able to have some small tanks and being able to slap on what they did. They would slap on the warning label and they'd slap on the other labels, but you could literally just pull the sample, the winery would pull the sample right out of the tank. And, I feel like things like that, as long as you're still going through the guarantee that the grapes came from BC, they should still allow it to be VQA if you can prove that those grapes came from BC.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Mark, the other thing we haven't talked about is reform of the Liquor Control Board. I mean, the most obvious one for me is, this statistic that the shelf space that we get on from the Liquor Control Board is dramatically less than our market share, right? And it should be part of government policy. It should be part of the mandate letter of the Liquor Control Board that they have some type of Buy BC program, right?
Well, there were some recommendations related to that in my report, but
No, it just should be, right? But the world is different today. Local supply chains is what it's all about, right? And customers are in the mood to buy Canadian, right? And with the collapse of our dollar, foreign products get more expensive. This is the time to do it. Right now. The regulatory changes aren't all provincial. Another pinpoint thing for Sandra's list is this is the time with the foreign worker program. They've accommodated with these $1,500 grants and have helped the cost, but it should be easier the application system, the process should be much simpler, and it should be much simpler for long-term workers to become permanent residents, and that would help the industry. That labor supply is very important to the industry.
I'm just looking at the time now. Do we want to start maybe opening things up for questions?
Yeah, sure. One question I just got in chat was just wanting you guys to clarify about opening the wine shop up for retail sales, like maybe not tastings, but being able to open up just for retail.
Well, there's never been a prohibition on retail sales. Wineries have always been allowed to sell retail all along. They're in the same category as liquor stores. An on-site store, an on-site manufacturing store is in the same category as a regular liquor store in terms of the provincial health order. So you're allowed to sell, as long as you have appropriate processes in place, you can sell.
Well, let me make a point that's sort of the direct, and Sandra made this comment to me recently, and it's so true. that there are small but very successful private liquor stores in various regions, in the Gulf Islands, up north in Prince Rupert, Prince George, Smithers, whatever. And wineries that take the care to develop a relationship with even a small winery develops a strong relationship with one of those private liquor stores, that can be a very significant source of sales for you and a long-term kind of sure thing for a few cases every quarter kind of thing. And so I think that's another thing people should be thinking about.
Just got a question here for wineries. Should they start purchasing disposable cups for tastings or remain with glassware?
If spittoons are even a reality anymore, they're probably gone forever, right? But certainly if you're going to allow spitting, I think it should be in disposable cups, individualized disposable cups. I don't have a view one way or the other. I mean, and I don't know that others. Sandra, what do you think of? Do you think it's necessary to go to disposables to make the customer comfortable?
Personally, I hate trying wine out of plastic disposable cups. I mean, they tend to do that in the government liquor stores, and I think it's terrible way to taste wine. I mean, I think you obviously need to have very good sanitation systems and practices in place to make sure your glassware is thoroughly cleaned properly. But personally, I think plastic cups for actually tasting wine is
I agree. But and one way to avoid that is that people are talking about is flights, pre-poured flights. So you'd walk into a tasting room and your host would be on the other side of a plexiglass, but the wines you were tasting would already be pre-poured and in glasses already. So it'd be minimum amount of touching back and forth, or bottles touching rims and people handing glasses back and forth and stuff, right?
I don't know. Personally, I'd rather see the person pouring the wine to make sure that I saw what was going on. If it was already poured, I wouldn't know what.
The protocols, I think you're going to have to minimize the touch points in the whole process. I mean, that's just a reality.
Mark and Al, I have a specific question about BCWI recommendation processes on the back end, how that goes to government. As a BCWI member for a long time, I'm not very clear on that process, and I really appreciated the condensed list that you sent in advance of this meeting. It was an incredible list of recommendations. Could you explain how that process works from the BCI to government?
Well, I can explain the process that I'm involved in, which is the Business Technical Advisory Panel process. The internal BCWI processes, obviously I have nothing to do with that, and I don't know how that works, but the BCWI is a member of the Business Technical Advisory Panel, which is the industry stakeholder group that provides recommendations to government on the liquor industry, including the wine industry. And so we, during the original panel process, the BCWI was involved in all of the recommendations that were made in the original report. They're also currently involved in sort of continued meetings with government, and they have been involved in recommendations that have been made recently. And generally what government has said, I mean, publicly they've said this, is that they want recommendations from anybody in the liquor industry, whether it's the wine industry or restaurants or whoever. They want it to go through the Business Technical Advisory Panel process because they'd like to sort of have the whole industry look at it and come together. And we've been pretty successful in basically making sort of consensus driven recommendations to government, which I think have a better chance of success than if just one group on its own puts that forward. So certainly, as I mentioned earlier, I think, if the wine industry has any particular recommendations, including the ones probably that we've already discussed, channeling it through the BCWI is the most effective way to get those recommendations before government, and to get government to look at those things in the most time efficient way.
Thank you.
I'd comment that I guess I have to agree with Mark's saying, but I also have a bit of discomfort with it. The BCWI only represents about half of the wineries. And as the industry is sort of reorganized along regions and sub-appellations, and there's these stronger regional organizations that meet regularly and are really rooted in the problems that they're facing day to day in their businesses, there's some creativity and some energy coming out of that, and I'd encourage them to try and do what Mark says, whether they're members or not, go meet with the BCWI and coordinate. But then I'm also, and I kind of agree that you dissipate your strength if there's too many people bothering government in disparate ways. But also, I'm not totally comfortable at funneling it all through the BTAP committee, because the BTAP committee was sort of founded on a consensus basis that the industry, being the private liquor stores and the wineries and the restaurants, would try to come up with consensus policy changes that all of them could agree to, because the government didn't want to sort of face the wineries lobbying for something, but the private liquor stores lobbying against it, right? But it kind of finding that consensus every time by working through BTAP kind of waters down some of the things you might ask for. But maybe Mark's right that it's more realistic not even to bother to fight for something for our sector of the industry if some other sector is going to fight against it, right? But it does limit the kinds of things you can ask for. So I'm not entirely comfortable with the way it's working.
No, I totally understand those points, Al, and I would not discourage people or any group from putting forward their ideas, whether it's through the BTAP process or directly to government through other processes. I was just basically trying to explain how the BTAP process works.
And I'm respectful of it. I mean, I'm not, it's what we got and it's working to some degree, right? So that's good. But maybe again, in these extraordinary times, who knows, just a letter to a minister or something from a regional group, who knows what might work, rather than get bogging down in too much of the regulatory process that is so used to saying no, right? To things.
Well, I think you're right. I think governments of all levels are having to react much faster and be a lot more responsive, and react a lot faster than they would in normal times. I think they do realize that there are large sectors of the economy now that need help, and they certainly need help on regulatory barriers and changes. So I certainly think if there are ideas to put forward, it's definitely a good time to do it.
Heidi, is your concern that, I kind of feel like I'm looking for some guidance from the BCWI on how we can move forward with some of these things, and we were talking about it earlier, consistent messaging that comes out from all the wineries so that the consumer expectation is, particularly as it relates to tasting rooms, so that there's some consistency there. And so I guess there's two factors at play. One is the asks of government where they can support us, but then also how we come out as an industry and ensure the safety of our guests and our staff and can move forward back into business on the DTC side, really the tasting room side. Those two things at play are difficult at this point to understand the process that is is going to allow us to engage in that part of our business again. I think that's one of the challenges we're seeing.
You know, my question was more process related. I feel a little bit in the dark as to where the missives from the BCWI stop and what happens in the conversation between industry voices and the government. I don't know where that stops and ends and how that process works.
And who is the be all and end all of the industry's voice as it relates?
I think Mark's comments were very helpful. Thank you, Mark. I didn't even realize that was the body that you sit on existed. I think that's wrong. I do now. I can't wait to learn more about it. But the fact that I don't know about that is a little bit upsetting.
There is if you want to find out about the Business Technical Advisory Panel and
I would very much love to.
And the report that was written, there is actually a page on the LCRB's website. If you go, like the menu that they have on the left side of their website, there's a somewhat cryptic description. It says something like improving efficiency between the liquor business and government or something like that. If you click on that, it actually takes you to the description of the Business Technical Advisory Panel, and you can actually read the report, and it does describe it there.
Great.
Real quick note, we always send a follow-up email with resources. So Mark, I'll either find that, or if you could pass that on, I'll make sure that link gets sent out to everyone after the call.
Thank you. That's some good clarity, or it might provide some clarity.
To Miranda's point about developing a protocol, it's super important that it's a protocol that we believe in, that we really think will make our customers safe, and that the entire industry buys into it. Because, you know, the first time a cluster is identified from coming from a winery will be the last time we're able to have winery tasting rooms open until there's a vaccine. You know, I'm sure of that. So, you know, we're you know, 250 odd wineries, but I think we need to agree on a protocol and buy in and everyone follow it, because I mean, it's science, right? It's not just regulations, it's what's really happening out there, and there's a risk, a huge risk, right? That's it.
Yeah, well, the practical reality of what you're going to get, though, for that isn't anything that is that comprehensive, right? If you're looking to do something today, you go to the WorkSafe BC, and they've got 6 things that you should be doing, right? And they focus on training your employees, getting the right personal protective equipment, putting up plexiglass in your space, getting rid of your coffee machine, protocols for keeping your bathrooms antiseptic, and all of that kind of nitty gritty. And it's kind of a guidebook to walking through your facility and where do your staff congregate? Is there a staff lunchroom somewhere that you should be getting rid of? All of that kind of stuff. And beyond that, the only other place there's going to be for you to go, I think, is the restaurant industry has been a bit ahead of us, and they will be putting out very shortly, I think, a protocol for restaurants that will establish practices in terms of, like, don't put the cutlery on the table till the meal is served, and the tables are this far apart, and there can't be more than 6 people at a table, and all of that kind of stuff. And we have piggybacked on that, and I think the only thing that the BCWI will do in addition to that is this playbook that I think I talked about earlier. They're going to put out a playbook next week that is sort of an addendum to the restaurant protocols that is winery specific.
One question I had was kind of where, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but where can we really push, right? Like, you know, we've had 50 something wineries on this call. where you know, if we're say using even this platform of what we're doing with BC Wine Weekly to take some of the recommendations, whether it's secondary tasting rooms, whatever, and we're having a contact campaign where everyone's contacting their local reps, like what can we be doing? What do you guys think that will actually take at least some of what we're hoping for and actually push it through, or apply as much possible pressure? Because I think we need to be ambitious right now. I don't want us to lose sight of that.
Well, you know, I mean, there's a couple of different, I mean, there's a number of different things you can always do. Right? You know, the process that I'm involved in, I've kind of already explained. And BCWI would be the route to go through with that process. You know, that's not to say that there aren't other ways to, you know, approach government as well. If you have other issues or more individual issues, you can always approach the LCRB, or you can approach your individual MLAs, or you could get together in smaller associations and you know, start sort of campaigns and efforts that way. You know, the process that I've been involved in is a little more formalized just because of that way that it was set up. But there's always ways you can push for different issues. I mean, I think that some of those issues that you've already identified are kind of on the radar of government, you know, already. But you know, I think, you know, from my perspective, the logical way to do it would be through BCWI. But I'm not discouraging you from doing other things as well.
Chris, let me put in a plug for one thing that I think that's important for everybody to focus on. Is there's a couple of initiatives in the Valley to get a large percentage of wineries signed up on a urban spoon type program, you know, reservation system for wineries. The BCWI has got a tour app for the wine industry, and they're thinking of adding a reservation system to that. And then Lawrence Skinner at Painted Rock has found another one that a lot of wineries are considering signing up to. And, you know, apropos what John was saying before of keeping track of your customers and knowing who your customers are and giving people a good experience, I think the industry is going to move to by appointment only private tastings. That's already been the movement in the industry. The current situation is only accelerating that. And it's a huge advantage to know your customer before they even show up at the door, knowing who they are, having their contact information, both for purposes of COVID in terms of tracking and following up if there's a problem in your facility and you have to tell people about it, with their consent, getting their email address and whatnot for follow-on marketing, and avoiding the situation where too many people show up and you can't handle it, and having people coming back. It's an idea whose time has come again. And it's going to be fundamental if you want to participate in the tourist traffic this summer, I think, to be part of one of those.
I will just say thank you all very much for participating. I thought that was a useful session. Lots of good information sharing.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Any resources, Mark and Al, that you'd like us to share afterwards? We did send out your articles from both of you. We're all submitted to everyone beforehand, as well as kind of anyone that might be interested. But if there's anything else you'd like us to share afterwards, or anyone participating, if you have any links or anything to share, because we'll send out kind of a resource list afterwards, along with the replay of the call. That's great. And I'd like to thank again Mark and Al for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate this. This was great.